Hi there, my name's Paul Coney, and today I'm going to show you how I would paint a landscape and sky in watercolour. The landscape I'm going to be doing is based on a rural part of New Zealand called Awhitu, and in this landscape, just as a point of interest, I'm going to be including an old fence post, an old strainer post made out of what's called puri wood, which is a wood in New Zealand that was used probably 100 years ago quite commonly as fence posts because they last so well in the soil. Because this is a scape with a large sky in it, I'm going to, I think, crop it slightly from the bottom so it's got a slightly skinnier shape. Then it'll feel like it's a more expansive view. So basically I'm just going to cut about that much off the painting, or crop it that much. So now, as you can see, the bottom, it'll be from there to the bottom, and it's just got a more longitudinal feel. I've just put a little bit of masking tape across the bottom here so it's easy to see where the painting ends. Now, in terms of composition, what I'm thinking about for this painting is the golden thirds rule, whereby you divide the painting basically into thirds vertically and thirds horizontally, and at the intersections of these thirds it's a good place to put key elements there. So what I'm going to do with this painting is, in or around this intersection of the third here is where I'm going to have the fence post. So this will just be a bit of grassland in the foreground here, and the fence post I'm going to pretty much have here. Now I'm going to make it reasonably large because it is a point of interest and a feature, and it'll be something to really anchor the foreground. You can see I'm holding my pencil like this. When I start to sketch a painting, it gives a bit more freedom over the paper. When I come to do details, I change it to just the usual way of holding a pencil, but in the beginning it gives a lot more freedom. It feels awkward, but it will give you that extra sweep. Okay, again, because it's watercolour, I'm not going to do an awful lot of sketching. So basically that's where the fence post is going to be. There will be some bits of grass sticking up. There's a bit of a clod of grass and earth there. And I'm going to have hills or part of a peninsula in the background here. Something like that, and possibly something coming down this way as well. So it all leads into the fence post. Up here will be a sky which I think I'll largely make up. Okay, I think that's pretty much almost all I need for the sketching. Before I paint, I'm going to rub these pencil lines out here just so you can't see too much of them in the sky. The scene which I've sketched out here is basically, it's an area called Cochrane's Gap in Awhitu. So, because I'm going to do it in transparent watercolour, what I have to do first, of course, is preconceive it. We know with transparent watercolour that I have to leave out my lights, so I have to decide where I'm going to have my lights first. And basically, probably the tops of some of these clouds and the sides of these clouds will have light bits in them. The right hand side of this fence post in the grassland here there'll be little bits of light grass showing, and on this side, and right in the foreground here there's going to be like little bits of actual individual pieces of grass like pastoral coming up. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do, I think, is put like a ground wash over the whole painting. And what I'm going to do, the sun is going to be, or the light source is going to be suggested here. So this side of the sky is going to be lighter than this side of the sky. So what I'm going to do is put a bit of a wash over here, probably a yellow, slightly yellowy orangey wash. It can go over this fence post a little bit, and then as it comes down to where the grassland is in the landscape, I'm going to change it to a greeny sort of a colour, just the pale green, the lightest part of the fields here. And also here I'm going to put a pale sort of yellow. So that'll be an overall wash in wet and wet pretty much before I start anything, and it will give the scene an atmosphere to start off with, that it's like a late afternoon shot where the sun's just starting to go down. For this painting, again, I'm going to use a limited palette. I've chosen pretty much 5 colours. There's cadmium yellow pale, there's burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin crimson, because I think I want to give this a bit of a slightly late afternoon feel. So with the yellow and the crimson we can get some orangey, yellowy sort of sunset colours. Cobalt blue and burnt umber. I've chosen cobalt blue because it makes a nice even green, as we'll be doing some grasslands. I'll make the greens out of the cobalt blue and yellow. So I'll just mix the colours up first for the ground wash I'm going to do, which will be yellow first. So this is cadmium yellow pale. You see I have 4 buckets here because it's always good to make sure you've got some very, very clean water. And 2 buckets gets dirty quite easily. 3's a bit better, but 4 make sure you've got clean water. Okay, I'll do a yellow and a little bit of alizarin crimson, so we have an orangey colour there. A little bit more yellow maybe. Like that. Now for a green, I'm just going to mix some cobalt, a little bit of yellow as well. Now that's quite a bluey green. I want a more yellowy green than that, so it needs a lot more yellow in it. Even a bit more than that. Okay, we need a bit more yellow. So I'm going to have two tones of green really. One will be a little bit more bluey, that one, and I'm going to have a very yellowy one in the corner here. Okay, that will probably do. So those are the colours for our underwash. This wash, this first wash, is going to be done all wet and wet. The effect of doing this wash too, apart from giving it a late afternoon feel, is it's a wash that's almost using all the colours in the palette. So it's going to be a unifying influence right from the start. in terms of integrating the painting with colour. The first thing I'm going to do, because it's wet and wet, is wet the paper. So I'll just quickly do that. Now when you're wetting the paper, rather than under-wetting it, I put too much water on because I want it to become absolutely saturated. When it's saturated, you've got a longer working time if you're doing wet and wet. If you don't wet it really thoroughly, it'll shorten your working time. So put too much on and then get rid of some rather than putting too little on. Okay, so that's well covered now. And I'll just wait a few seconds for that to soak in. And you can even, with excess water, you can even tip it this way and just brush the excess off down the bottom. Like that. Make sure it brushes all the way. Okay, now while it's still wet, I'm going to put in my first underwash colour, which is going to be basically just a yellow. I might actually just use a little bit bigger brush to put this in first. So it's going to give those clouds a nice yellowy feel. I'm going to put some down the side of the fence post as well. And I'm going to bring some orange into that. Bring it down over some of the grassland. Now this is the time where you can just tilt the paper. And I'll just let this spread round a little bit. There, see that's evened it out quite a lot. I'll bring a tiny bit more here. Now the light source, or there's going to be a suggestion of a light source about here, so I'm going to leave that as white as possible at the moment. Down where these hills are, I'm just going to put like an underwash of this green. I'll use the big brush again, I think. Just really put it on. So that pretty much covers most of where the grassland is, just as a pale underwash. And then right in the foreground here, I'm going to put just a few deeper bits here and there first. There, and also perhaps just a few brighter yellowy bits as well where the grass is. Okay. Now if you see puddles in an area, like I can see a puddle here, all you do is pinch your brush between thumb and forefinger like this, put it there, and it will actually soak up some of that water without drying out the paper. You see it's gone. If you use a tissue or whatever, it'll create a hard edge because you'll actually dry the whole thing out. So you don't want to do that if you want a nice soft wet and wet wash. Okay, so just have a look at that. I think that's okay. I might put a little bit more orange in. Make sure the edge of this fence post where the light's going to hit it here is perhaps tinged with a little bit of yellow to suggest the sun's starting to go down a bit. And I think that'll do for the underwash. So I'll just dry that now with the blow dryer. Now there are going to be light areas on this post, so I need to protect the post because I've got a lot of work to do here in the sky and doing the scape in front. I could paint round the post, but there's too much to do. I want to, with the sky, I want to do wet and wet things that's going to be flowing all over the place. So what I want to do really is mask it out. And for this, I use masking fluid. It's like a rubber liquid that dries and protects the paper from any paint getting through to it. And I just put that on in the shape of what I want to protect. And I put it on thickly. It's better to get off if it's on very, very thickly. If you put it on too thinly, you're going to have trouble rubbing away at it, trying to get it off the paper. So just keep that in mind. And if there's any little breaks in it, the paint's going to get through, so you just have to make sure you cover it absolutely thoroughly. Where I've put the yellow underneath in this underwash, the masking will take a little bit of it away, but it won't take all of it away. So we will still be left with like a bit of a yellow stain there, which is in keeping with the rest of the painting. So I'm just going to cover this as quickly as I can. Masking fluid will wreck your brushes, so don't use good brushes, always use old brushes. And to protect them a little bit more and make them last a little bit longer, I make up a solution of warm water with just a tiny bit of dishwashing liquid in it, and I put my brush in that before I put it into the masking fluid, and that will help the masking fluid come off the brush, plus it will help the brush last just a little bit longer than it normally would. But after a while you will have to throw it away. All the hairs will become stuck together. So I'll just carry that on down to there. Just make sure there's no little pinprick holes in it where colour could get through. That's about it. I think I'll just dry that now. So after I've been masking, I just give the brush a little bit of a wash in the water and dishwashing liquid and try and get rid of most of it out. But as I say, after a while the brush will actually be ruined. There we are. Off it all. So just use a very low heat with the blow dryer if that's how you're drying it. I'm going to mix up the sky colours now, or the colours I'm going to use for the sky. So the first is going to be the cobalt blue, which we've already used in our palette. Now again, I have to determine, because this is going to be wet and wet, I have to determine how thick or what intensity of colour I want. So we don't want an absolutely bright blue sky, but we do want to have a nice clear blue. So I think that'll be okay to start off with. Now I'm also going to need a grey. So the grey is cobalt blue and a little bit of umber. Now the viscosity of the grey is important because it's wet and wet. I want the grey, I want to have a little bit of control over the grey. So I just need to find a bit of watercolour paper and then I'll test the actual viscosity and colour of it. Okay, now I'll just test the colour and intensity of the grey. Yeah, that has got a reasonable viscosity. I think when it goes into wet and wet, that will dilute again a bit more. So that's a relatively neutral grey. Now I'm going to make a slightly warmer grey for the grey in the clouds as well. So there's a bit of a variation of colour. A little bit of blue, but not as much as the last one. And then what I might do is get a little bit of burnt sienna and just put that in. Just warm it up slightly. Yeah, so we've got quite a nice browny colour. I'll take a little bit of that, put it over here, and add a little bit more burnt sienna maybe. And a tiny bit of water. Have a look at that. Yeah, and that's gone a little bit warmer again. Alright, now might need a bit of yellow as well, I think. So I've got cadmium yellow pale here. I'll put that in. Tiny bit more water maybe. Do a little bit of a test on that. And I'll see how the blue runs into this slightly. There, that should be alright. And I think that's probably about all we need. Maybe a yellow, an orange. I'll do a little bit of orange here as well, with alizarin crimson into the yellow. Again, it's not bright, but it'll add that tiny bit of crimson into it. Now I'm wetting the paper thoroughly. As you can see, I'm putting the water right through that fence post, which we've masked out. Over wet the paper, really saturate it. If there's too much, you feel there's too much water on, just get rid of some by tilting the board and running it off the top of the painting here, like that. Okay. Now I'll start with the blue, and remember I'm just going to test it first. Okay, it's still a little bit wet, but I'll make a start. Now you can see the yellow is going to have an effect on the yellow is going to have an effect on the blue, the yellow underneath. So you can see that coming through the blue. I'm going to leave out the shapes of the clouds at the moment. So there's a cloud here, which I'm leaving out. and also here. So I'm just leaving those spaces where the cloud's going to be. Now I'll move further along here. And as I get down to the bottom here near the horizon, I think I'm going to introduce a little bit more yellow here. And that will just run into the blue slightly. And then I'll join the yellow into the blue here as well. And then the yellow just goes into a kind of nothingness, as though there's sun glare there. Okay, I might put a little bit of orange in as well, which I'll start here, down the bottom. Just run that in there. Make sure these are joined properly here. Right, now as you can see, it's all quite wet. I'm just going to even out the colours a little bit now, just by tilting. And the paint I've put on should all run into each other, all the colours, like so. Now I'll get some of the grey which we mixed up, and I'll test a bit. Okay, now as you can see, that's very dark at the moment. So I've just put a little bit on, and now I'm just going to spread it around a bit. Leaving light at the top of the cloud here. Now a bit more grey under this cloud here. I'm just making fairly abstract shapes where the grey shadow of the cloud is. Again, just go straight into where that fence post is. We don't have to worry about it because of the masking. And then a little bit of grey down here. Now I've created a hard edge at the top of this hill because the grass of the hill is actually going to be a lighter tone than the grey of the cloud. Okay, and then along here as well. Now as I go into the sunlight here, I'm going to change from the grey into the slightly warmer mixture. So we're going to a brownier version. Same with here, I'll just start doing a little bit of a browner version. Now you can see the paint starting to just go that way to bleed a little bit, which is quite nice. I mean, that to me, that's watercolour character coming through, so I'm not going to try and disturb that or anything. I'm just going to leave that as it is. Okay, now I'm going to maybe put a cloud here. Now I've gone to the more burnt sienna colour, so I'll put that on. Just let that bleed in as well. I might actually put a little bit of orange up the top there. Okay, now a lot of wet and wet is playing a waiting game really, because I don't want to try drying it with a blow dryer because it could dry the whole thing to speed up the process. So it's a matter of just waiting until things are at the right level of wetness. I'm going to get a smaller brush. Along the bottom here. I might just do a little skinny little cloud. Again, just carry it through into here. Create a little bit more complexity there. Again, we wait. Okay, I'm going to put a few more little wisps of cloud here. And up here. Maybe even here. So now I'm letting the painting guide me a bit, rather than trying to dictate to the painting. The painting's kind of showing me where it wants to have some clouds. And I'm just following pretty much what it's saying. Okay, now we'll carry some of these over here as well while it's still wet. So it's been wet for quite a long time now, which is good. We've had a good working time in there. Now again, as we start getting into a sunlit area, we'll go a little bit warmer. Okay, now while it's still wet, I'm just going to try to take some paint up with the brush. Now this brush is damp, and I've squeezed out water between thumb and forefinger, so it's just left slightly damp. Now if I put that onto where the paint is, it should start sucking up a little bit of it. It's not doing it that much at the moment, but as it dries it should do it more. If we come down here, The other thing we can do is get a tissue. Now this will leave a hard edge, so I won't be taking paint away leaving a soft mark. This will leave an actual hard dry mark on the paper, but I'll show you this as well. So just press it slightly, and that will actually just take paint out. Do a little bit down here. I don't know if you can see the glisten on the paper or not, but you can see that the tissue is completely taking the water out of the paper. Now I'm just going to darken this bit here, just in front of where the sun is going to be. At this stage I'm going to dry what I've done, and the next thing I'm going to do is do what's called a negative image. I'll show you that. Now, because the sky is wet and wet, it's quite loose painting, I want to tighten up parts of it. So I'm going to do what's called negative imaging, where I bring paint down to the top edge of the clouds and I leave it in a hard line, a hard edge, so that it shows off the light hitting the cloud a lot more. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with just a very, very soft brush, I'm gently going to wet along the top edge of the clouds here. So it'll be wet at the top, and where it hits the cloud there'll be a hard edge. I don't want to disturb what I've done so far though, so I'm doing it very, very gently. So I'll just try that bit first. Get some blue, and we're just strengthening the blue, and can you see I'm creating a hard edge at the top of that cloud instead of a soft edge. Just carry that up into the water I've put there a bit, so it goes into nothingness. And then the same with this. Just create a bit of an edge there. And I'm changing to the yellow slightly, because we're going into a yellower bit of sky. And I'm doing that there as well, and just merging it into the blue. So you can see that's really brought out the light at the top of the clouds a lot more. So I might do it as well down here with this cloud. Just bring out the top edge of it more. So I've just got the blue paint, so I'm just going to run it along that top edge. And then the rest of it just goes into the water I've put at the top there. Perhaps a little bit here.
Just yet.
So here and there I'll just do a little bit of a softening, but I want a clear edge there. Okay, that's just tidied it up a little bit, maybe at the top here as well, just slightly. I'll just wet that. I'll get some more of the yellow again, just at the top there. Yeah, that's fine. So I'll stop it there. This is the result of a fairly loose made up sky, and you can see the contrast between the softness of the wet and wet here and the clarity of the it's almost like a lost and found edge. This is the found edge, the lost edge goes up further. So I think it's quite effective in that way for a simple sky. Next I'll do a bit on there's a little bit of sea just here which I'll put in. For the sea I'm going to use the cobalt, but it seems to have a little bit of a turquoisey, maybe cerulean look to it. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of yellow into the cobalt, and that should approximate the colour I want. Just a little bit more yellow content. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this masking tape and I'm going to put it across the top of the horizon. So this is the colour that I've got with the cobalt and the yellow. It's just got that slightly higher yellow content in the blue. That's the cobalt there, that's with the yellow added. Now with the horizon of the sea, I'm going to use this is just ordinary masking tape which you'd normally use for building or painting or whatever. It's not a very nice colour, this one. I'd prefer a paler one, but that's all I've got at the moment. And I'm just going to put that straight along the horizon there. What I'm going to do with the cerulean that I've mixed up, or the blue that I've mixed up, is I'm just going to dry brush it. So this will just ensure that when I'm dry brushing, my strokes don't go up into the sky. It'll just stop them doing that. Okay, so I'll start here. Now with dry brush, you don't want too much pigment on the actual brush, which obviously is why it's called dry brush. And I'm just leaving it to pick up some of the little highlights in the sea as well. So you only want to do it very sparsely and sparingly. And that will probably do pretty much. Just to give the impression of the ocean out there in between the hills. Now you can see it's crept up under the masking tape a little bit there where I didn't push it down properly. So I'm just going to get a tissue, lay it on that line and try and soak up just as much as I can while it's still wet. Yeah, so that's better than it was. When it's drier, I'll just get some water and I'll just lighten that a little bit just to fix that up. The scene I'm doing here has strong light and shadow. So when I'm thinking about my approach to doing this scene, I separate it almost into two aspects. The local colour is basically the intrinsic colour of the scene, or the colour of it as if it was just in flat light. The other aspect I think of is atmospheric colour. Now the atmospheric colour is how shadow basically, well, light and shadow affects the scene. Now in painting this, I also separate it into two stages. So the first stage, which I'm going to put on in the hills, is going to be the local colour, which is just going to be a variety of greens and greeny yellows, as if it was pasture land. When that's done, I'll mix up some shadow colour, and when it's dry, I'll put the shadow colour over that in the places where the shadow is falling. Now before I put this midground in here of the grassland, I'm going to take into account this is right in the foreground here that leads up to the fence post. This is going to be grass as well, and some of it's going to be quite close up. And it's going to be in sunlight. So what I need to do when I'm painting this, I have to take this into account, that little bits of grass will be sticking up. So what am I going to do? I could just paint around it, just paint little shapes in so it looks like the grass is sticking up. But what I'm going to do, I think, again, to get it even finer than that, is just use some masking fluid, and I'm going to put little bits of grass with masking fluid on there first. And the other thing I will probably do a little bit later to it is I'm going to use some wax in the grass as well to create a rougher texture in this foreground. But at the moment what I'll do is just mask out little grassy shapes in this foreground ridge here. Now I'm just going to mask some little bits of grass right on the edge of this. Now when you're masking, and especially with grass, a lot of people mask grass just straight up and down, so it's spiky. But what happens with grass is it's not all straight up and down, is it? It goes off at angles, it goes sideways, some bits are thick, some bits are thin. There's all sorts of things that happen. So try and move your brush so that it goes at all different angles and doesn't just go straight. Now what I'm doing here, this should be visible in front of the grasslands that I'll be painting next. So I'm just going to wet this midground area first, again, and do the basis of the local colour in wet and wet. So I'll just get this nicely wet first, like that. Bringing the water down over the bits of masking fluid which I've masked out there, so they should show up against it. Just even out the water, make sure it's quite well saturated on this side as well. Okay. Now I'm just going to put some of the light to mid green in first. I'm not going to do a lot of detail for this because this is just the midground. We don't want to lose distance. there's just going to be variations of green in the paddocks. I still want to keep the sunlit areas fairly light, which I'm going to miss out when I put the shadow colour on. And of course, with aerial perspective, as things go into the background, the general rule is they get cooler and lighter. So we don't want anything too dark towards the back of the midground there. Okay, as you can see, the masking fluid's taking a little bit of effect there where I'm putting the green. You can see some of the grass sticking up. Let's go this side as well. Yeah. Right, now I'll go to the slightly deeper green, and I'll put in a few more undulations with this. It's just creating little hills and valleys down there. The bottom of the shadow here, I'm just going to make it a little bit deeper. Or the bottom of where the shadow's going, I should say. I'm just kind of underpainting where some of the shadows are going. Okay, so here I'm just deepening within where I'm going to put some of the atmospheric colour, where I'm going to glaze it on top. I'm just deepening underneath this and just giving it a little bit more detail here and there, so it's slightly more realistic. Over here I'm just putting a little bit more depth into the shadows too. Actually maybe a few little bushes here as well would be nice, a few trees and bushes in the distance in the background. I'll add a tiny bit of burnt sienna here, just to give a slightly different colour. Burnt sienna too is always good to put with green, because red is the complementary of green. In other words, it enhances green if it's beside it. And burnt sienna has got quite a high red content, so it always makes green just sing a little bit if you put some burnt sienna in somewhere when you're using a lot of greens. As I say, I don't want this to be very, very detailed. I want it to look distant. A little bit of burnt sienna here maybe. And I think that'll probably do for the background. Now that I've got basically the local colour that I want in, I've dried this, and it's now ready for me to put in the atmospheric colour or the shadow colour. Now the atmospheric colour I've mixed up, I've just based on what was the darker green in the palette already, and I've added more blue to it, and I've added a tiny bit of burnt umber to it. So it's already got a yellow content, a tiny bit, because it's going on the grass. So this should be about right, and it should be reasonably transparent. I'll just do a little colour test here. Yeah. So you can see it's a version almost of that sea colour, but a darker tone. Okay, now I'm just going to paint this wet on dry, the atmospheric colour. I might use a slightly bigger brush actually. And I'm pretty much going to put it over where I've suggested some shadow earlier with that wash. The sun, of course, is coming from the right hand side of the painting. So everything on the left will be a little bit more in shadow. Now here, there's a couple of what are called lost and found edges. So you can see a hard edge there that I don't want because the hill's rounded. So I'm putting a little bit of water, and then I'm just bringing the water to the paint, and it softens in. And the same with this here. A little bit of water here, and then I bring it to the paint so that softens in, and maybe just that top bit there as well. So they're called lost and found edges. Then in the background here, I'll start with this hill here, I think. And again, all these hills on the left hand side are going to be more in shadow. So I'm running that up the left hand side of these hills here. And then that of course goes along there. You see I'm leaving little snippets of light here and there, where the sun's coming through and hitting the edges of the ravines and things. We'll bring it up here over that medium green, which I've already done. Now as it gets to the edge of where the sun is up here, I'm just going to change the colours a little bit, because this will suggest like a slight sun flare if I go a little bit warmer. So I've mixed up some orange, and I'm just going to add some orange in there. Just join that in. I'm going to add some yellow to the orange to suggest a little bit of a sun flare there. Okay, and the other thing I can do to suggest the sun being there is to put some water at the top here in the sky, just some clear water, and this is like a lost and found edge as well, and I bring the water to the paint and just let the paint flare into the water a little bit so it all softens. There, and that will look just a little bit like the sun is quite strong over there. Okay, just make sure that bit's okay. It's all got to be an even wetness when you put these washes on wet on dry. If they're not, that's when watermarks are created. Sometimes watermarks can be happy accidents, but sometimes they don't look quite right either, so you have to decide at the time. But if you keep the wetness of the paint even, you shouldn't get watermarks. Okay, so here's another situation where it just needs a little bit of a lost and found edge. We just want that to be softer, maybe even here as well. Soften that a little bit. There. Okay, now we'll carry on down. Some shadow on these bushy things here, here. And then there's just a few little shadows here with this slight hillocks. Over here. Going down slight banks there. Bottom here, I'll just carry through the masking fluid there. You have a few little cast shadows happening as well. And then in here. A tiny bit more detail here and there. Okay, and that's enough to give a bit of a sunlight and shadow effect on the midground. So now we'll move on to painting the foreground and the post, which of course is going to be the main feature of the painting. It's good when you're doing a landscape like this and you have one element. I think it's more effective if you play down the rest of the painting and concentrate on what the main element is, then the eye doesn't get confused.